The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on what time zone you are located in. Thank you for being a part of our webinar today. I'm Lisa Scott McCracken with Holleran, and I have the pleasure of having Tim Carmichael with La Posada as my co-presenter today. So I'll be doing a more in-depth introduction of Tim and his background and what he contributes to the webinar today. But I want to thank everyone again for being a part of this webinar. For those of you who are new to the webinar, this is a part of a series of webinars that Holleran has been hosting in recent months all around the topic of social accountability. And each has focused on a little bit of different take on the overall topic of social accountability. And today's webinar specifically focuses on the messaging component, internal messaging, external messaging, so communications around that, reporting. And I will let all of you know, as has been the case with the previous webinars, we are recording all of these from an audio standpoint, and we are also posting both the audio and the PowerPoint on the Holleran website, and they are also located on the Leading Age website. Generally, that happens a couple days following the conclusion of the webinar, but for those of you who missed any of the previous sessions, certainly you can tune in and listen back to those, or certainly you can share them with members of your team. A couple other things to know. We will follow up after the webinar today with a PowerPoint to all of you, so that way you actually have the document for your own reference and can, again, forward around your organization if that's helpful. We also will be asking each of you to do just a brief survey, which will pop up at the end of the webinar. Always very, very helpful for us to have your feedback, and I think we asked one basic question in terms of, were you pleased with the webinar, but also allow for comments. And we're really trying to cater these webinars around topics that are going to be most helpful for you. Our ultimate goal is to really, further the education and understanding of social accountability and its role in the senior living sector. So understanding really what your needs are is going to help us to specifically offer these webinars that are the most relevant to you. And feel free to ask any questions during that little survey piece as well. I will also let you know that we encourage questions throughout the webinar. Because of the size of the webinar, we do have to mute everyone, so we are not allowing for any type of hand raising, if you will, or verbal questions, but you can in your panel, I believe it's one of the open panes there that you can see on your screen. Feel free to type in questions as you have them. We will have a specific time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers discussion, but I will do my best to keep my eye on the questions as well, and if there are some questions that are specifically relevant to a particular slide, whether it's myself or Tim's portion, we will do our best to focus on that as well. So thank you again for being here. As was mentioned, I'm Lisa Scott McCracken, and for those of you who know me, my name used to be Lisa Scott Lehman, so it's the same person. My name did change recently, so I know some of the folks who are participating today are thinking, who the heck is that? That's not Lisa Lehman. So same person, just different name. So it's my pleasure to be a part of this today. And I want to go over again what the purpose of the webinar is, and I obviously alluded to a little bit of that early, but we really want to share with all of you the importance of that messaging piece. Really, to this point, we've talked a lot about how do you develop a social accountability program and a culture, and how do you engage different stakeholders in that. But this messaging piece and the quote-unquote tell your story element is probably, I'm not going to say the most critical, but with certain audiences, I would say external audiences, whether, if you're ever in a situation where your tax-exempt status is challenged or people are questioning that, this messaging is a key component of that. So I'm going to be talking a little bit more in general terms about things to think about, and then Tim's going to get more specific as to what La Posada does, and is going to give you some examples. So definitely the importance of messaging, and then the tips and suggestions. The thing that philosophically we want to stay away from is just a big conversation of, oh, this is why you should be doing social accountability and this and that. And that's all great, but we recognize that all of you are really looking for some clear tools and tips and suggestions and follow this and do this an example. So we really want to make sure we provide that for you today. And then again, to hear from a provider. We always try to integrate at least one or two providers into the webinars, so you're just not listening to us the whole time. So again, I'm going to start off with some general overview and topics, and I know how we have this set up is where Tim really is going to take each of these topics and elaborate on them further with some specific details. The reason that we focused not just on external communications and messaging here, but also in the internal, is because you really need to challenge yourself to think about all of your different stakeholder groups. I think probably more often than not, organizations that are thinking about their social accountability messaging are largely focusing that externally, and that's okay. You know, obviously that's a big piece, and even the example I gave earlier, if you're ever in a situation with tax-exempt status being challenged, that external piece is important. But you need to have your internal champions on board as well. There's nothing worse than the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing. So, you know, everything from your residents, are they on board, are they supporting, or are they giving any type of resistance? And I know that, you know, there have been times where I've had some organizations have said to us, you know, our residents really aren't on board with this, and, you know, we're finding that to be a challenge, whether they sort of want it to be sort of a closed-door type thing and aren't really keen on maybe others coming in and using free meeting space, or whatever it may be. I would say 9 times out of 10 the residents are supportive, but you need to give them the opportunity to be supportive. If they don't really know everything that you're doing, sort of shame on us, if you will. So residents, family members, clearly they're going to be the ones who are out and about in the community, and your external champions. The staff, obviously, they live in your communities as well. That's one of the great things about social accountability and community benefit is when you think about things that you're doing to further benefit the larger neighborhoods and areas where you live, that's where your staff lives too. So you are getting that return on your investment too. And then board members. Now, my hope is that, and I know that Tim's going to give some examples about this and talk about their board and their expectations, but that the board is not so much on even the receiving end of this. That clearly up front, maybe they need to be educated and so forth, but also on the driving end of this. I would think with a robust social accountability program that the board members are very much supportive and a driving force with all of that. Clearly, the message is going to vary with each stakeholder group, and again, I know Tim's going to give some examples, but I gave an example there. So, you know, with staff, clearly you can share with them all of the great things that your organization is doing, but why not specifically highlight things that are going to be really meaningful to them? So maybe staff scholarship dollars that you have given in the past year. Family members might want to hear about the great support groups or newsletters or educational things that you've been doing around caregiving, maybe support groups. So again, I think the messaging is going to be appropriate and a little different depending on the stakeholder group. And I referenced, I think, the final bullet there about the need for your internal stakeholders to be your champion. Probably the best position in terms of an outcome you can be is that I think you know that you have, I'm not going to say fully arrived because we never want you to prop up your feet and feel like, you know what, we're great, we're on easy street now, but where you have other people starting to tell your story and do your work for you. So it's not so much just a one-way street. So in terms of just some numbers and some statistics, again, how this webinar series came about was we had done a CCRC social accountability study in partnership with Leading Age and asked a whole series of questions. In the first webinar we did, I did that in partnership with Larry Minix back in September. Again, that is archived as well if you want to take a look at that. But I pulled out one of the questions that was on that survey, again, because it has relevance to this topic. But we asked the different CCRC groups that responded, so does your organization produce an annual social accountability report? Yes or no? So you can see here that slightly 50-50, I mean a little heavier towards yes, you know, yes, we do produce some type of an annual social accountability report. But then our follow-up question was, knowing that, often organizations will highlight, here's what our community outreach, community benefit activities are, but then it may be as part of an annual report, so there may be a number of other different things in there, or maybe it's part of another report or something that your organization puts together. So you can see there, of that 55%, about half of them then do an independent report. So as opposed to being embedded within another report. So that gives you sort of an idea of where groups are. If you were to ask me, do you recommend having an annual social accountability report, I'm going to say yes. I think often a first step, if you currently have nothing, is to have it maybe as part of a larger report, maybe a couple pages devoted to certain things. But I think that there's a lot of power in having a separate report. But if you don't have that, don't panic and freak out, and you're not alone. It's okay. Again, this is a journey for everybody, but I thought that that would be helpful to see that statistic there. In terms of vernacular, and you probably have heard me already mix it up a little bit, you'll hear me say community benefit. We do a lot of the work with tax-exempt hospitals around their community outreach, and they specifically say community benefits. Senior living, I know Leading Age has really embraced the term social accountability. Bottom line, whether you say it's a report to the community or a community engagement report, generally I think it's all the same thing. I'm going to get into a little bit of the do's and don'ts here, and again, I know Tim gets into this too, but keep in mind that the whole point of telling your story, and I say this because I've seen some different examples of some reports that I think could be a little more robust, a little stronger in their communications and their messages. I often jokingly say, don't just list activities or don't have it be like reading a phone book. Nobody wants to read a phone book. There's nothing terribly compelling about that. So page after page after page of just word, listing of every group who maybe has used free meeting space, every group you've donated to. You need something that's a little more compelling to that. We often say a balance of the sort of some of the numbers and the data. So if you have some financial figures or counts of how many people, that you've touched with free support groups to the community, or your Alzheimer's walk that you sponsor, things like that, is a great report to have a balance of that, and then the narrative piece. And I know that Tim's going to give some examples of that, and we have given some examples in previous webinars. Highlighting case studies are great. Probably some of the most compelling reports I've seen, they have the pictures and they tell a little story, whether you've done some things with the food bank or whatever it may be. I would recommend that you think about that. I put can't be all fluff, so if it's all just telling your story and kumbaya and this is so wonderful, where's some of the hard data? So this gets back to the last webinar that was on tracking. So if you do not have mechanisms in place to even have that data, and you may be one of them right now saying, oh, that'd be great, but I don't even have data. It's going to take me 6 months to even get some type of a systematic thing to put together. And that's probably a good first step. So even if right now you might say ours is largely fluff, have a goal in mind of where you want it to be. The final balance, or the final bullet that I have there is, if there is something compelling, but it doesn't totally, what I'm going to say, quote unquote, fit, or it doesn't totally align with the IRS standards, I think that there's rationale or reasoning to include that. And here's where an example I will give. So let's say, the difference between what you're reimbursed through Medicare and what it actually costs you, so sort of some of that shortfall. Some of those things can be pretty compelling stories. You can find the whole exhausting list of what counts, what doesn't count. I know that those things were covered in the last webinar, but also if you go on the Catholic Health Association website, the Leading Age website, they get into some of that. And that's important. Yes, your accountants are going to want to know that. But I think in terms of the storytelling piece, even if the IRS says, well, that doesn't totally count, it can be a really important thing for your community to know about, and certainly some good positive feedback that can be garnered from that. Try to avoid taking credit for individual self-initiated work of staff or residents. And we get asked this question a lot in terms of what counts and what doesn't count. So if you have a group of resident volunteers that they go out and they are doing this and that, and you say, well, can we count that? The question back to you is, who's leading that charge? Is that something that you are supporting? Are you giving funds to that? Or is it really just a group of initiated or very motivated residents in your community that you really don't have a whole lot, a big part in that, and you're taking credit for it? So you need to be really careful with that. And again, I've seen some reports that are highlighting all the great residents that they have, and that this one volunteers at this school and they've gotten an award for this and that, but it's really not the community doing that, that's the resident doing that. Now, yes, you could argue that, well, without the residents here, if we wouldn't be here as a retirement community, the residents wouldn't be here to have the ability to go and volunteer at the school. I get that argument, and again, clearly there's some gray involved in all of this, but what role are you playing? Same thing with the staff. So again, there's some quick, easy things that you can do, whether it's offering up, the van for free transportation for the day if they are going out and cleaning up, I don't know, trash, along the river there in town, or whatever it may be. Those are things that you can count, but outside of that, you need to be careful. The second bullet on there, again, I've seen groups do this, and I think this is the clear balance between marketing and then the social accountability stuff. So it's great to market, we have residents that come from 28 states, and we're a destination community, and we're so diverse. Okay, so that might be appealing from a recruitment standpoint. I get that. But think about it back to the purest sense and definition of a not-for-profit. So again, this is in its purest sense, and I'm going back, a ways here, but a not-for-profit is put in place to serve the community and provide a service to the local community that if you did not provide, otherwise the government would have to. That's sort of the trade-off there. And again, that's sort of a historical, older definition of that, but that's where the roots have come from. So it's that local piece. So if somebody really wanted to pick a fight with you, quite frankly, they could pull out this report and say, no, wait, okay, so you're promoting and you're proud of the fact that only 15% of your residents come from the local community. So tell me what need you're meeting in our local community. So again, just think about that. Not to say that that's not a powerful marketing tool, because I know that it can be, but as I put down there, things that if you are doing any of these things above could really backfire. So you really need to think carefully about this. Considerations outside of an annual report. Tim's got some great examples coming up with this, but newsletters, whether it's for staff, family member newsletters, resident newsletters, if you have in-house television stations. So think of all those communication vehicles. Messaging through resident council, if you have a family member council, certainly a great way to get the message out. And again, if they can be your champions and sort of take ownership of it, that's a really great sign of a culture of social accountability. Ads in the local newspaper, seen a number of organizations do that effectively. You know what the best thing is, and again, I think this is an example of when you know that you've really, again, not fully arrived. I will never say that, again, you can just sort of sit back and relax, but nothing better than to have somebody else mention you. So let's say you are a huge supporter of the United Way locally. Let's say they have a big outreach thing for your seniors, or maybe not even seniors, and they see you as a key partner, and they want to highlight you in their newsletter. Great. Again, another example of somebody else telling your story and promoting you. One of the organizations that has been highlighted or participated in one of our previous webinars is Masonic Villages of Pennsylvania, and Tina Raybould, who is the head of their communications and PR, shared a story of their CEO being at a local town council meeting, and I think some of the local residents were really resistant to some proposed expansion of the retirement community. So the retirement community is really dependent on approval from this board. So someone, the community, some people were maybe moaning and groaning a little bit, and one of the council members held up their report and said, hey, have you looked at this, and this is everything that they do. And, unbeknownst to them, Masonic Villages did not plant that seed and say, hey, you need to bring that up. But it was a perfect example of somebody else sort of not defending them, because I don't want to sound like this is too, all about preserving the tax-exempt status. But, that's a very powerful thing to have happen. So I'm going to go there with the social media, Facebook, Twitter. I don't know to what extent all of your organizations do that. And I think that there's a great variety in that, but this is a wonderful way to communicate things that you're doing. Again, we're sponsoring the local Alzheimer's Walk here the third weekend in April. Please come out and do this. And again, just another way to communicate things. Making the reports readily available via the website. If you do an annual report, or maybe you have newsletters and things like that, it's great to have those things accessible where people can say, gosh, I know I saw that at some point, and they want to get a copy of it. They go on your website and it's right there. I would say for the hospitals, the tax-exempt hospitals, who some of them I think you could argue are a little further along with the reporting piece, most of them have that available on their website. Now, to the extent that you need to dig for it, there can be some variety in that for sure. But so try to make it somewhere where people don't have to go, 10, 12 pages deep to find it. Sample reports, I have them here. I referenced Masonic Villages of Pennsylvania. ABHAL is a great steward of social accountability, has for some time. David Grant from ABHAL, their legal counsel, has been a big speaker on social accountability and actually was on the last webinar. So these are examples. I know that there's many other examples out there, but you can see, particularly the one on the right, you see the pie charts and the bar graphs. Again, there's that data because they have those systems in place to track. And then they can tell the story on the right-hand side. So they've got the pictures and, a little bit of a study with, a case study with what they've done with that. So at this point, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to do an introduction for Tim and give a little bit of background on their organization and Tim's role, and then I will pick back up toward the end. But Tim Carmichael, I'm going to welcome him at this point. He is formerly the Vice President of Marketing with La Posada, and he is now the Director of the Inspired Living Institute of La Posada, which is La Posada's Institute on Aging. For those of you who are not familiar with La Posada, one of the things that I had mentioned to Tim is I had the fortune of being on the ASA's Quality First Task Force for many years, and I know La Posada has been talked about for some time in terms of, well, they do this and they do that. So they have a really, really long history in outreach to their community. They are a not-for-profit CCRC, and they're a 25-year-old single-site CCRC in southern Arizona. Tim has been serving seniors for the past 2 decades, and he develops and works to develop innovative senior programs. He's implemented senior housing choices, alternative energy sources, and worked with that with the CCRC. He's on the executive management team, so clearly he's well positioned to talk about this. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Tim and let him tell their story, and then we can certainly go to any questions and go from there. So, Tim, it's all you.
Good morning, and thank you, Lisa. Welcome, everyone, from sunny, warm southern Arizona, where today it's 70 degrees and sunny. Hope it's nice where you are. I think the introduction helped to frame a little bit about how it was that La Posada was really intricately involved with ASA, now Leading Age, many years ago to really move down the path of essentially having a social accountability focus. But a lot of what came from what we're going to see today actually was put into play, and I think, Lisa, right, I have control here?
You should, yeah.
Let's see here. A lot of what came from today, actually it doesn't show that, Lisa, but go ahead, came from our roots, which meant that over 25 years ago, La Posada as a single site was started by a hospital organization, a not-for-profit out of Tucson, and we are located about 40 miles south of Tucson. And ultimately, the not-for-profit hospital had in place what was probably known back then as a report to the community. So we already had some exposure to having this type of reporting structure in place, and then ultimately started to refine it as we move forward over the last at least 10 to 15 years, but certainly as we move forward with our development 25 years ago. At least it still doesn't show me that I have control. Oh, there we go. So here comes the slide. So actually the fact that we are so focused on social accountability is a part of our mission. Our CEO, Lisa Israel here, who's been with us since the beginning of La Posada, is really focused on making sure that the message gets out to the community. We are located, as I mentioned, 40 miles south of Tucson in a very small community of Green Valley, which is about 25 to 30,000 people. And we've been here for such a long time, you would think that everybody within the community knows who you are and what you do. Well, that's not the case. As I go through the community and speak from time to time, it's very clear that most people, either they're new to the community or even those who have been with the community for any real length of time, don't really understand who we are, what we do, and what we do for the community. So in many ways, the social accountability focus that we've created as a part of our mission is also designed to convey the message that La Posada does exist and what we do for the community. So it's a very integral part of our role to have this message in play for La Posada. One of the key issues, I believe, when we start talking about who should know what you do and why you do it, the general community absolutely should know what's going on, and we can convey that message in many ways, and I'll give you a slide here in a minute or two that shows how we do that. But we've also taken the tack to actually sit in front of the key decision makers within the community, within the region, within the state, so that they understand clearly who we are, what we do, and what our not-for-profit role is within the community. We actually have face-to-face encounters with these key lawmakers and decision makers and business leaders and remind them constantly who we are and what we do and why we go about it. And so that's a key component of getting the message out. It's nothing more than generally our executive management time, taking the time to do that and being visible, but ultimately it's a very key component of the communication and the message that we have. Again, as Lisa mentioned earlier, if your residents aren't on board, the employees don't understand what you're doing, certainly then you're kind of dead in the water relative to the type of thought process that you're putting in play for social accountability. So we have ingrained within our culture here, both resident culture and employee culture here at La Posada, why it is that we're a not-for-profit, how we go about conveying that message as a not-for-profit, and why it is that it's so important that we consider being socially accountable within the community. Oops, going backwards here. Sorry about that, Lisa. So we focus on methods of communication. So let's talk about the residents first. And certainly when they go through the marketing side of coming to the community to live, we mention to them more than one occasion what our role as a not-for-profit is and how that essentially gets intertwined into the community. But we take another more formal tack too, and we say to the new residents who come to live at La Posada, about a month or two into their residency, our executive management staff actually hosts an orientation for them. And so we can convey the message of who we are, what we do, and how important it is for us that the community know who we are and what we do. And we do that through formal orientations with new residents. And then after that, every quarter on our campus here, we have business meetings. We have essentially quarterly meetings that really, as a key component, it's an agenda item. It reminds the residents who we are, what we do, and how we reach out into the community and why it's so important that we continue to do that. So once they become oriented, understand that we have this focus, we reinforce it with quarterly meetings and ultimately turn to newsletters as another method as well. Certainly, quarterly meetings are nice. That is 3 months or 4 months sometimes between those meetings, and ultimately we want to reinforce the message once again through the use of newsletters. And so we do that monthly, if not more often than that, depending on how our CEO wants to convey certain messages. But ultimately, it is underscoring and supporting the general message to the residents, which then is reinforced within the community. The employees of La Posada do the same. We essentially orient them as they become employees and listen to how it is that they believe La Posada is involved with the community, and then we provide this community message as well. And we, again, underscore what we do at La Posada with the employees through the use of forums, which are generally about every 3 months, if not often, more often than that, depending upon what's necessary. Again, the employees themselves have a newsletter to which we convey and support the message. This is not probably earth-shattering stuff, but it is the part of the process that we have followed. Now, the Board of Trustees, I will tell you, the La Posada Board works a little bit differently than most standard boards do, in that the board really provides the kind of the vision and the structure in which the big ship La Posada is to follow into the future. So they don't set anything specific about the fact that we need to be socially accountable. Although it is a part of the culture, they understand it. It's really up to Lisa, and that's our CEO here, and her staff to get the message out appropriately. However, we do remind them, too, as to what we're doing within the community. So we have, at our regular board meetings, an operations report which specifically singles out one of what we call an N. It's an objection, going in the wrong direction. An N to which we report to them as to what we are doing within the greater community. And again, it's not only just local, where you're located, but again, it's also the state and anything you're doing nationally too, which is important. And then generally to the local community. Okay, so there are many, many different methods that you can get the word out. One of which is probably the most often used, and that is to have a newspaper ad. We happen to be such a small community. We only have one newspaper in the community. And so when anything happens with La Posada, we generally have a big splash, but ultimately it is our intent to get the message out and seen, so we don't spare any expense relative to that. We take out a full-page ad and ultimately use color. It's important. The second thing we do is we prepare an annual report every year about how La Posada operated, and part of the annual report has a segment in there about our social accountability activities. And then, of course, we are accredited here at La Posada by CARF CCAC, and of course a big portion of that accreditation is included in their normal review of how it is that we are staying active within the community. One of the things that I think can be overwhelming as being part of trying to shape the message and how things look when you're doing it every year is you can get lost in the detail about, really what kind of visual effect would you want to use, what kind of language do you want to use, what kind of message. And we often, early on, took a very creative route and decided to do things very uniquely, but we found that that took an awful lot of time to develop that kind of structure. So we have now really taken the hint from Leading Age's annual theme, and so we've incorporated generally Leading Age in how it is that we go about shaping the look of the message if we're doing a newspaper print, or maybe the content of the message if it were ultimately a narrative that we had to develop for it. Here's an example. For example, in 2006, Leading Age came out with a theme that essentially said, tell your story. So what we designed for that particular year was well, you can see in the ad, it's a bunch of books that are open that ultimately tells the life story about La Posada and who we support. And we just use that mechanism rather than try to recreate everything from scratch. So one of the things that you're going to find within all of the examples that I have, and many more that I didn't include today, but you're always going to find in the message a listing of the partnerships that have been created in the general community. And this is where I think Lisa hit the head. Don't think in terms of having just the large players that you might be involved with within the community being listed there. You've got to list everybody that you had an encounter with, So that, again, if you're a small organization out in the community of Green Valley where we are, and by golly, you did have an interaction throughout the course of the year, whether you gifted money or you supported them in some way or had volunteers involved, at least their name got mentioned in the ad. So we don't exclude anybody just for the fact of how much we may have given or done for that organization. One of the things I know Lisa mentioned early on was how in the world do you keep track of everything? And so if the previous discussion was, putting a mechanism in place, I can tell you when I first got here about 10 years ago, it was nothing more than a series of emails to our CEO. Please give me the number of hours that you might have devoted to the community if you were volunteering or you're sitting on boards or doing that type of thing, or whether or not there were actual dollars that were given from your department out into the community. It started that basically, but now we have evolved into a far more sophisticated way of tracking it, and we actually have expense codes and time codes and things that are developed just for the community benefit, as we call it, and so that we can more easily track those dollars come the end of the year. It's nothing more than an accounting button that gets pushed, and we have all the hours and everything listed. Here's an example of a more recent ad that we created for the Community Benefit 2009. Again, it followed a certain theme, and ultimately we threw our own spin in. So you've got happy, smiley faces and employees and volunteers, and we have a format that we have followed, listing, again, the community partnerships on the right, and we have other things. I'm going to get to a different slide here. And this particular slide, oops, sorry for this. Get back there. This particular slide, just a blow-up of it, and shows you how we listed. Now, again, I agree with Lisa. You have to be very careful not just to list things because people are not really compelled to read a great deal. But in our community, where we are, we're such a small community, we have people of these organizations looking to this ad to make sure they got mentioned. So we do, in fact, list them in this way. If you look on the left-hand side, we always give some idea of why we are accountable, what we believe the key components are, and what is involved with our mission for being accountable within the community. We always list that. We don't expect people just to remember that from year to year. And then ultimately, we always list who we served, how much money we may have spent in given areas. This I can tell you, as we've listed under 2009, this methodology evolved as far as putting dollars in or leaving dollars out, because there is now more push from the community, especially as the economy has been so performing so poorly, that essentially if you throw a lot of numbers out there, there are going to be people within the community or other organizations who are going to challenge you or ask you more directly about your support within the community. So this is, for us, kind of a compromise. We used to put into the ads, we gave X over the course of the year, and it was a big number. And then we found that people were not quite clearly focused as we were, and had to defend our motives. But we do want to make sure that when you do decide to account for the time and activity that your community is involved with, La Posada definitely wants to make sure that all cash gifts and other types of support within the community is captured. I'll give you a good example. Here in the community of Green Valley, it's not incorporated, so they don't really have, other than the county and maybe sales taxes, they don't have a direct tax design for supporting the community. So we have selectively, in our support design, gone after what is important to support La Posada, specifically in this case, the fire district. We happen to have built 20 years ago, right around the corner from La Posada, the actual fire station. We've actually funded that annually so that we have, for example, a 3-story building here. They didn't have a ladder truck that would reach 3 stories, so we bought the truck. And so we wanted to make sure that this is directly communicated to the community that La Posada is doing this type of activity. There are other not-for-profits that you can't discount. I mean, we here at La Posada, even though we're the big fish in the small pond, quite frankly, we want to make sure that the word is out there that we're supporting other community organizations, and we do. And then our residents do things on their own and by our direction. And so ultimately they've created scholarships and other opportunities for students, again, in our area, which is primarily a retirement community. Ultimately, the school systems are under-supported, and we want to make sure that if the residents are involved, that they get the message out that they're involved, and we as an organization want to be directly involved too with supporting the community, especially the schools. Again, it's a part of the tax consequence of not having that type of support here. And then, of course, there's another part of the message too. Again, this is unique to Green Valley perhaps, and not simply like your organizations, but transportation's a huge issue here. There are no taxi services here in Green Valley. We're 40 miles from the largest city. So transportation, just getting to and around the city is important. But we support that here at La Posada, and we want to make sure that's part of the message too. I think we have already talked about the data collections. The employees do that. They do that through a series of codes, and we track that all year long. And then it's nothing more than an aggregate at the end of the year. We do analyze it, of course. We want to take a look at what we've done, and of course that helps to shape then the message that we're shaping for the coming year in the reporting design. Some of the things that we want to make sure that we all follow, I think, is be consistent when you communicate the message. It doesn't matter who you're talking to. If you're telling one group one story and telling another group another story, then I think the whole system falls apart, because then they start looking at each other as to why it is that the message is so different. So we've been very clear. It doesn't matter if it's a resident sitting in front of us, an employee sitting in front of us, or a legislator, that the message is always the same. We want to make sure that everybody's on board. It's one thing for the CEO to say, yes, we're going to do this as our part of our mission to be socially accountable, but the actions have to support that, and in our case, they are congruent. Outside of that, methods of communication, they're all going to be different. Lisa mentioned social media. We're kind of a late entrant into social media, but it is now part of our role here. And so as the accountability for 2012 essentially is starting to be formatted, we will start incorporating Facebook and Twitter and all those good things too into our message design. So one of the things that I just wanted to mention here about the dues, and this is really when you're sitting in front of legislators or business leaders, you know, one of the things that gets lost very clearly for us, and this is part of our message every year, is that you can fight the potential of having tax consequences. We're a not-for-profit, and so the message and the movement out there is to try to remove that particular band or criteria. But ultimately, when we sit in front of the legislators and the business leaders, we try to impart onto them that our direct support, for example, to the fire station in the district, is dollar for dollar. And at times when there is a tax that can be collected, property tax and otherwise, you're not necessarily getting the full benefit of the dollars that La Posada would be paying coming back to the organization. We see that locally here, that they get about 48 to 60% of the dollars that are paid. It goes elsewhere within the greater county. So we like to say to our legislators and our business leaders, if we have elected to support a community asset like the fire district or the school system or like, it's a direct dollar-dollar credit, essentially. So these are our tax liabilities as we looked at La Posada, and we're exempt from property sales and income tax, and it's a very large number. And this is why when we've gone back to reshape the message, we used to put this number in the ad and say La Posada provides this type of benefit. And now it's being potentially challenged, and we don't put the exact dollar in any longer, but we do highlight certain things that are within the ad, for example, that might just support and underscore what we do. Part of my message here, I think, is you have to be creative, and again, however it is that you choose to design the ad or design the method of communication, one of the things that we want to make sure that you don't do is make it look like one of your ads, because it's not an ad in our case. This is a message to the community. It's a statement that basically says, this is who we are, this is why we do what we do for the community and how important it is to the community. And through our actions, this is how we support the greater community. And if you throw dollars in there, like I say, be selective, but ultimately it just tells people in a very nice global sense that you are a worthwhile community. And so it's worth the effort to collect the dollars, do the ads, do the things that are required to get the message out. It's well worth the effort there. I think that's the end of my comments. Lisa?
That was great. And actually, I have a number of different things I just want to mention and to point out that stuck out to me particular. Well, first of all, there is a first. I had never heard of an organization, a senior living organization, purchasing a fire truck. So that was new. I had not heard that before. But and I must admit, when I had initially looked at that, Tim, in your slides, I thought, well, where's the rationale with that? And it makes a lot of sense now when you give your history, and plus the fact that if you are vulnerable in terms of you've got multiple floors within your organization, you know that they do not necessarily have a fire truck that's going to meet that, up to those floors. That was an interesting connection. One thing I want to point out to all of you, and you'll see this if you didn't catch it on the specific slide where he was. Again, we will email this out to everyone. But I don't know if you noticed on those, specifically with the messaging that they had in the newspaper. At the bottom of each of those, there was a few sentences from Lisa, their CEO, and I think one of them was also signed by maybe their board chair. And I'm going to read back that too, because again, I jotted it down here on a piece of paper. It stuck out to me. And the one in particular said, "We thank Green Valley for the opportunities we have been given to serve and support you. We look forward to being a part of Green Valley's future. We are committed to you." And then the one other one said, "We look forward to meeting the needs of the future and impacting the lives of many." I want you to think hard about that, because that is clearly a paradigm shift for some organizations that clearly communicates that we are one of you. We are a part of this neighborhood, as opposed to a message of, here we are within our bricks and mortar, and this is everything we do here. So I love the positioning of that, and I'm not saying that that's, a spin or a play on words. I think that that's clearly the philosophy that La Posada lives. But I just think the way that that's articulated is very, very powerful, that, we are one of you. We are a member of this community, just like other, not-for-profits and businesses and schools and so forth, and we're acting like that. So that was pretty powerful. I appreciate those examples, Tim. So certainly, if you have a question, you can mention that. I see that there is one question here about, and I will also mention too, if for some reason we do not get to your question during the time frame we've allotted, we will keep track of that. We're able to log the different comments and so forth, and we can follow up with you individually. But the one question is, they've been asked to include social accountability in the 2011 annual report, but we don't think the campuses have been tracking community benefit hours in a structured way. For the first year, highlighting this specifically in the annual report, do you think estimations of hours and dollars are acceptable? I can sort of share my thoughts, and then Tim, I don't know if you have a response to that, but particularly this is a common question when organizations talk about, I'm just starting here, and we want to do a report, but we really don't have those mechanisms in place for all of the tracking. My thoughts are, I think if you can have some estimates where you have enough confidence in that, that you're generally in the range, I think that that's okay. I mean, if it's a matter of going back and forth between, gosh, is it really, 1,500 man hours or 1,200? I wouldn't sweat that a whole lot. I think when you get into the dollars and cents, you need to be a little careful with that. I would probably be more maybe conservative as opposed to overtelling your story a little bit. Tim, I don't know if you have any thoughts or tips in terms of somebody just getting started and want to do some messaging and reporting but don't quite have the tracking mechanisms in place yet.
I think that, Lisa, what you just talked about, making sure that you at least have some way of supporting what you're saying, whether it's not right to the exact hour or not, is a key question until you get to putting dollars to it. So I can tell you in our evolution that we may have had statements in previous newspaper ads or other communications that might have indicated we as a community had 130,000 worth of hours, whatever that number was, of volunteer time or support in the community. Well, we do know that it has that number. But when we started putting dollars to it, we actually became very similarly to an accounting audit. We wanted to make sure that if somebody did challenge it, that we could go and show them the documentation. So that's evolved over time.
Yeah, well, as you're building your programs, I mean, there's a role of a lot of different individuals in this. You know, Tim had mentioned accounting. So there's clearly an accounting piece of this. There's the marketing. There's a planning piece to all of this. So, you know, you've got to make sure you're looking at it from all of the standpoints. But like I said, I would probably maybe be a little more conservative as opposed to overstating, because if for some reason someone wants justification, it'd be better to say, oh gosh, you know what, we don't actually give, you know, 40 hours of that, we gave 60. Oops. I'd rather be in a position of that as opposed to the opposite. Again, knowing that you're putting that out there as a public document. One of the other comments that was given, yeah, Tim, did you have something else to say about that?
I was just going to add that when, like I say, we get involved with the business leaders and legislators, and although they may talk in generalities at times, we like to give them the document from time to time to say, here's how much we're providing and how many hours we're, all these things that are important to them, so they realize that we're just not talking off the top of our head, that we have a system in place to account for it.
Yeah.
That's probably when it really comes into play.
Yeah. So there was a comment here that was, or a comment / question that was posted about, you know, donors, financial donors give to our organization, and we can't necessarily go out and then maybe spend funds externally, you know, large amounts of funds for things, but, you know, we really need to keep those funds and that money in-house. This actually brings up an interesting point. I had a dialogue with someone recently about this, and yeah, and I know every organization is structured a little differently, but had a discussion with someone from a foundation recently around this topic of using donor funds. And the thing that I will say is I don't know that necessarily, and this is probably actually a whole even webinar on its own, but that necessarily foundation dollars or dollars that have been raised out by, you know, going out and soliciting from donors are necessarily the same dollars, you know, penny for penny to invest in all of your social accountability. Because I think that that's a valid point. If you're going out and saying, you know, can you please give to our resident fund and our benevolent fund to take care of residents if they run out of, you know, monies and they can still stay in our skilled care unit or whatever. That way people are dedicating money to that, and then if you're going out and, you know, giving money to the local United Way, they're going to say, whoa, 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 that's not what I gave my money for. I think you need to think carefully about really where your roots are with your social accountability program, and I think if it's seen as an extension of, let's say, a foundation, you need to think really carefully about that and its place, because I think that the funds and the dollars and cents can get blurry really quick there. And the other thing that I would just say about that is it's not always dollars handed out. I think that's one of the biggest things that, quite frankly, frustrate people and people get overwhelmed with a little bit when they talk about social accountability. It's not just throwing money out to your community. That it's really not all about that. There can be a lot of you know, creative things that you can do, or things that you do just with existing space. For example, probably one of the easiest things, and we found this in the national CCRC study we did, is almost everybody, you know, allows local groups to use maybe meeting space for free. But it's not, so that doesn't maybe cost you money other than other than the utilities, and maybe you need to have housekeeping or someone maintenance clean the room afterwards, some light refreshments, but you can still translate that to a dollar amount. So if you know that they would have to otherwise go to the local conference center or the local hotel and rent a room, how much would it cost them? So I just felt like I needed to mention that at this point, because people tend to go down the, oh, this is going to cost this money route, when it can when it can not necessarily be all dollars. Tim, someone asked if you could further explain the ends that you mentioned. You talked with the board. It's about the ends. They had asked you if you could maybe give an example of one. Sure.
For example, in our structure, instead of having objectives throughout the course of the year, or goals that you might have. The way our particular structure of our board works is we have identified 6 ends, which are really goals that the community must strive to achieve every year. These ends never change, and one end particularly is end number 4, I will say, and that is to have a presence in the community as a leader within the community. And by that we define leadership to mean either we're involved with direct support, our employees are involved, we're leading business practices. It can take different forms, but one of the clear ends or goals, as we call, or ends is synonymous with goals, is to make sure that we're doing these type of activities for the organization as a whole. And we've got 6 of them that are defined. That never change, but ultimately we're always working and striving to achieve under them.
Thanks. Tim, there's another question for you. Tim, do you include the interest savings from using tax-exempt debt versus taxable debt?
A question I couldn't answer. I'm sorry to say I don't know that. I can only tell you that the type of calculation that we follow relative to anything that the community itself may be involved with, and I'll give you an example as probably something that's close to this, and that is in our nursing environment where the outside community is allowed to come in and use it for transitional care, rehab, skilled environment. We take a loss. And so by at least IRS statute, as far as I know, ultimately we can use the value of the loss towards the social accountability. But as far as interest is concerned, I don't know if we actually take that into account.
Okay. Yeah, you can see where this can get very technical, and like I said, it really probably a strong look at your entire program involved legal, accounting, all of those different groups, and because they're all going to have very different perspectives on it and contribute something a little bit different. We did have one person ask if we could unmute the audio. Unfortunately, we cannot do that the way we have the webinar set up, that everybody is muted, so it's not an individual specific thing. Just again, given the size, we had nearly about 200 people register. So those are all the questions that I see. There is one other thing that I want to just reference real quick before, again, I bring up the contact information for both of us, and also some contact information for Leading Age. But again, stay tuned, because we are not too far off from the release of our toolkit. We've been talking about this for some time, but what it is, we really are focusing the social accountability toolkit to be positioned as very much an implementation guide and a user's guide. So we have it chock full with tools, worksheets, tip sheets. We've got everything from a readiness assessment in there to a job description of someone who oversees the social accountability. So, it's really aimed to help people through, regardless of where you are in this journey. If you've been on this journey for a number of years, or if you're just starting, allows you to really take some really practical tools. So we're clearly going to be promoting that through our mechanism, through Leading Age, through a number of the different state associations who we've been doing a lot of work with. So, and we know in the next year, actually, if you've got, if you're in a state that does an annual conference and has a state association meeting, we're going to be out and talking about the toolkit and sharing that information with all of you shortly. So, so stay tuned for that. The other thing I would mention before we wrap up is that we do have our next webinar scheduled for April 5th, and that's going to be on engaging partners. Tim talked about all of the partners and, going down things such as, is more always better? Sometimes it's a strategic partnership, the little guy versus the big guy. So we're going to give a lot of examples about that. So stay tuned, and we'll have that as a resource for you. So you can see here we've got the contact information. I will point out with my email, we do now just recently updated my email to lmccracken@holleranconsult.com. We will have that corrected in the PowerPoint that we send out to all of you. But if there are no further questions, and I'm not seeing any that are posted, we thank everybody for their time. We hope that this was beneficial to all of you, and we look forward to hearing from all of you again. So thanks so much. And thank you, Tim. It's great to hear La Posada's story.
Thank you.
All right, take care, everyone. Thank you.